All right.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
So, good morning. I have put together information on onboarding new recruits. As an introduction, I have been involved in FRC for 18 years now. I started as a student on a team. I graduated in 2003, and I've been mentoring ever since then. My current position is the head coach and drive coach for Team 3538 out of Auburn Hills, Michigan. Competitive youth robotics is my full-time job. So when I am not working with the team, I write training curriculum for FRC and FTC teams, and I run day camps and after-school programs. What I do is very closely related to my team. So some things technically are my company and some things are technically my team, but for purposes of the rest of this presentation, I have not differentiated between the two. My goals in this block of time are that I hope by the end of this, you have a paradigm of onboarding as a distinct phase in the team member experience, and that you are inspired to contemplate how you can structure that to strengthen your team culture, which ends up supporting both your team performance and the student experience. And I hope you recognize onboarding as a process that is all set for continuous improvement and not something that's bound to tradition or the way things have always been done. As a point of note, if at any point you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or unmute yourself and speak up. I would love for this to be a discussion as opposed to a monologue, although I am fine with speaking if that's how it turns out to be. But don't be shy, feel free to speak up. One of the great strengths of FRC is that there is incredible variety in how teams approach the challenge and team cultures and processes. And I would love to know, dissenting opinions and how other teams do things differently than I do. So first of all, what is onboarding? And this is something that I think is very critical for the success of our team, but is also something that I don't necessarily hear a lot of other teams consider to be a unique and special and discrete process. So the way that we break these things out is recruiting is the process of making students aware that the team and that FRC exists and getting them to that first meeting. So I'm not going to talk about recruiting, but my delineation of recruiting is by the time they get to the first meeting, they have been recruited. They are there. And that's where onboarding takes over. So the Wikipedia definition of that is the process by which new team members acquire the necessary knowledge, skills, and behaviors in order to become effective organizational members and insiders. And that insiders part is super key, and I'll get to that more later. And the goal of onboarding is that all of the team members get to a state in which they can function independently and contribute to, well, both contribute to the collective goals of the team and derive a substantial value from their experience that they carry forward with them into their college and career experience. Questions so far? Comments? Has anyone on their team have a similar paradigm? All right, I'm going to take the silence as a no. So the next step is, what are the goals of onboarding? And there's a lot of generic goals. This list could be way longer, and I encourage everyone that's listening to kind of brainstorm what their own goals are. But the RoboJackets goals specifically are that we have all of our team members engaged in a substantial manner and that they don't think of themselves as rookies. So I know that some teams, define a rookie as, their entire first season. And my goal through onboarding is that they think of themselves as team members as soon as possible, rather than like, oh, well, you've made it through your first season, you're no longer a rookie. And we want them to have that vision of themselves, because at that point they have an investment in the team and in the program. We want everyone to understand and adhere to the expectations of team members. We want everyone to understand and adhere to routines and procedures. And we want everyone to both be comfortable with and understand, and then secondly, be partners in promoting our team norms and culture. All right. So going to that the first bullet point, back to engagement and retention. And the context for this is at the end of the 2020 season, I was interested in why my team members do what they do. Like, why do they work so hard and what motivates them? And we decided to put together a survey, and part of that was we gave them a series of statements and we asked them to say, is this thing a factor in why you work as hard as you do? Like, why do you put in the crazy time like this? And there were 6 different categories of statements. I have the other 2 after this, just in case you're interested. And the big thing that came out of that is that the 2 things that motivated our team members the most are having a sense of belonging and feeling like they are useful team members. And that's not a groundbreaking concept. Like, when you think about why anyone does anything, of course, like, they want to have a sense of belonging and they want to be useful. So it's not like this was information we had never heard before, but having it laid out in these little graphs reminded us as coaches, like, oh, I want these kids to love robotics and I want them to develop technical skills. But regardless of what they end up going into in university and career, the biggest thing I can give them right now is that sense of belonging and that ability to be useful. Because those are core things that everyone is looking for no matter what they do. And that's one thing that sets us apart from any of the other activities in the school, right? When these kids are coming into this team, they may not have yet strongly developed interests or passions. So making sure we are addressing these 2 factors is the first step in building a strong team. For the sake of completeness, here is some other 2 of the other categories that we asked them about. We have a huge emphasis on tournaments and competitions. We go to, in non-COVID land, anywhere from 10 to 12 events per year. So understanding how students are motivated by the role that they play at events was something that we're very interested in. When we say the term work crew, we mean like the job that they do at competitions. So drive team, pit crew, strategy, and most recently we've added media. The interest in STEM and skills was particularly interesting, especially for us because it honestly pointed out a weakness of our team. We are not awesome with software and programming, and that shows through in the data. And then here are the last 2 categories that we asked them about and what their motivations are. I thought it was interesting that they vehemently disagreed with the statement that they don't know why they do this. So if you don't know why your students are doing what they do, I encourage you to ask them, because if it's up to my 25 kids, they mostly know why they're doing it. And understanding that promotes successfully onboarding students onto the team. All right, so we understand onboarding as a concept, and sorry. We understand onboarding as a concept, and we used the data to identify that sense of belonging is something that, like, all right, that's our first goal that we want to address. And that we tied back to the greater concepts of inclusion, equity, and diversity. And I've posted here a list of questions to ask yourself about your team. And the first one is, like, how can we make our team a welcoming environment? So for us, we want every new member that comes into our team to, as soon as possible, have an experience that shows them that they can do this. So the very first thing that every student coming into our team does is learn how to beak a battery and get it installed in the robot and drive and operate the robot. Because we want them to know right away that this is accessible, and we want them to have all of the skills that everyone else has. And, you know, doing the fun part isn't something that they have to earn, it's something that they get to do. One of the questions just to kind of ask yourself internally as you are developing your approach to onboarding is, what opportunities do new members have? And are there different opportunities for new members versus veteran team members? And there's not a wrong answer to that question, but it is something important to understand. There are two elements of kind of like the inclusion and welcoming environment that I see happen on a lot of teams. And the first one is, I see a lot of teams have a concept of like freshman jobs or rookie jobs. And at least for our team, we avoid that. We are very hardline that we don't have freshman jobs or rookie jobs. It's not, you know, the new kid's job to clean or to sweep or to sort out fasteners. Those are things that we all do because we appreciate having a functional shop to work in. But the grunt work is not a freshman job. It's something that we all share in together as part of the team. And then the second thing that we make sure we avoid is sorry about that. Pranks or jokes that are specifically targeting new members. So it's pretty common. Oh, 1 second, sorry. We're just gonna quit. I forgot my team has a meeting this morning. It's pretty common for teams to have kind of a cultural tradition of like asking new team members to go find the left-handed wrench or the left-handed screwdriver or other silly tools that don't exist. While most kids do end up taking that well and think it's funny, it's something that we've found is off-putting for a lot of team members, especially those that are already prone to, being more shy or timid or less confident. And so we don't want to make the mistake of treating someone in a way that would turn them away before they really get the chance to find themselves and find their place. I see, Lisa, I see your question. I'll go to the training and then we will get back to that because I think that's somewhat related to training. All right, so we've addressed sense of belonging. The second big thing is being useful. So we take 3x3. We call it the 3x3 approach to training. And it's our goal that by January, every team member has a minimum of 3 skills by which they can meaningfully contribute. And every skill has at least 3 team members that are proficient and successfully able to complete tasks in that area. To be quite honest, that second phrase isn't necessarily directly related to onboarding, but it's part of the greater philosophy, and I thought it was important to include. Our reason for making sure every team member has a minimum of 3 skills is that as a small team, we don't have dedicated subgroups or work groups, and all of our team members are pretty fluid throughout the year. So we want them to have enough skills that no matter what time of year it is, whether it's that initial build season where we're doing concepting and building the field, or we're deep heavy into the robot build, or late season states and worlds when we're practicing and refining, we want them to have enough of a variety of skills that they can probably do something that needs doing at the time. And then on the other side of that, it's if we have 3 team members that can do everything that needs doing, that prevents bottlenecks and roadblocks and other interruptions to being able to get things done. And we're not suddenly relying on, one kid that runs the CNC or one kid that runs the lathe, and they end up having 24 hours worth of work that needs to be done. So for, again, first of all, writing curriculum is one of my full-time jobs. So I recognize that most teams aren't this in depth, and I also want everyone to know that they're in no way, shape, or form do you need to be this in depth to be successful. I just wanted to share what we have. In addition, you'll see that there's a lot of empty boxes in the training outline. That's because that too is a work in progress and something that we're always, trying to develop and make more effective. So I have shared it with you as it is. Incomplete and always getting better. We split the skills that team members can learn up into 5 different domains. The first one that most team members end up being part of is a build domain. And I have highlighted the boxes that end up being kind of our basic skill set that most team members end up learning within their first year or 2. So here is build. In the second category, we have our knowledge base, and this one is really important because this one is roughly what gives team members the ability to communicate with each other. So almost all of this is not hands-on knowledge. It essentially boils down to vocabulary, although we don't phrase it that way because that's off-putting to a lot of people. But what this entire category does is it gives us the ability to communicate with each other. So students know what the names of wheels are and what the names of motors are and where those are located and what the names of fasteners are and what the names of mechanisms are. And they can communicate with each other and with us in words. And that is a critical step in onboarding to develop team cohesion, where You don't need to rely on asking each other to get the thing from the stuff from the second box on the left of the third shelf in the supply closet, because that's an opportunity for things to go awry. Anyway, then this section is our work crews. So I've been over how we are real big on tournaments and competitions. And as part of onboarding, we want students to understand as early on as possible, you know, how they are going to be involved in the competition process. One thing that we do as a team that is, kind of unusual, and I recognize that there's a billion other valid ways to do this, so don't take this as me saying one way or the other is right. But our students usually specialize in their work crew, so whatever they start doing when they join in 8th or 9th grade is usually what they do for the entirety of their time on the team. That works out really well for us because they become experts, and then when we do off seasons, they all shuffle around and try out different jobs. But because understanding the competition roles is such a core element of what we do, we make an effort as part of onboarding to introduce everybody to all of the different work crews, both so they can start getting a sense of what they're interested in, and we can start getting a sense of, how every new member is going to fit in based on what the current openings are and what the, current makeup of the team is. I guess, so now is a good thing. Now is a good time to answer Lisa's question. What are the pros and cons of different jobs for new team members? So training in new folks with new tasks and avoiding freshman jobs and ideas to balance this. All right, so this is a super complex and difficult to address question. And it largely depends on how you structure your team in general. So we don't have work groups at all. So there's no particular urgency to get students identified and sorted into a work group because those don't exist. So if you do have work groups, that'll be a lot different. And the main balance there would be, quite honestly, having new members and not having them assigned to any particular task or skill or group or project is rather chaotic, and not something that most coaches or teams want to experience for a long period of time. But I recognize that the risk we run with trying to assign students into groups quickly is that most incoming new members don't actually know what they're interested in. They often think they're interested, but until they have a context for what a particular skill actually entails, it's really difficult for them to know what they want to do. So if we try to silo them too early, then they end up in a skill or group or project that they thought they were interested in, but they're actually not. And it's no fault of theirs that they don't have the context to understand that. Our approach to balancing the kind of freshman jobs thing is we work really hard to lower barriers to entry and make skills as accessible as possible. I guess like the CNC process is a good one. We have an Omeo CNC. It's a 2.5 axis router. We intentionally split that manufacturing process up from our design process, and we selected software for generating G code specifically because it's less complicated and something that we can make formulaic and teachable. So we wanted to boil down all of the information that students need to know to be able to generate G-code and fixture parts onto that machine and prepare stock into something that we thought we could teach to an average 9th grader in 3 months. And pretty much all of our processes, that's what we try to do. Like when you look at strategy and scouting, we were exploring using Tableau for our data visualization. We currently use Google Sheets. While we recognize that Tableau has it's super powerful software with some awesome opportunities, we chose to stay with Google Sheets for now because that's something that the students are familiar with, and that makes it more accessible and lowers that barrier to entry. And we thought that's what was important. I would rather have 8 kids that are 100% proficient in Google Sheets than 1 or 2 kids that are 100% proficient in Tableau, even if it is more powerful, because our team is stronger when we have more proficient kids as opposed to kids that are proficient in more complex tasks. So that was like the first element, is just breaking down everything that we need to do as a team and figuring out how we can make that as accessible and teachable as possible. And this has been a many years long process. With 3538 in particular, our rookie year was 2014. We resurrected an old number, so it doesn't quite match up, but we're 7 years into this and, still developing new processes like monthly. So this is something that takes a while. The other thing that we did to kind of balance like not needing to have freshman jobs is we looked at our workflow and identified the things that most frequently need to be done. Finishing parts and getting all of the powder coat done was like a huge task. We do in-house powder coat, but that means that although it's not a difficult skill to teach, we probably need somebody running the powder coat almost every day for a good 4 weeks of build season. So that was a task that we could like definitively say is useful and necessary, and is also teachable and accessible. And so like, I guess that was our primary balance with not having freshman jobs, is figuring out what we can make teachable and figuring out what is probably going to need to be done for, multiple weeks or months out of the build season. There are other tasks that, fulfill one of those qualities, but not both. Like electrical is a really good instance of that. Quite honestly, we don't have an electrical group because we really only need to wire up the robot like 4 days out of the entire year. We don't want to spend weeks upon weeks wiring up the robot, which means that I don't want to necessarily have students that expect that they're going to be doing that a lot. But the way we can address tasks like that is in training, we really highly emphasize the value of practice. So the way I phrase it is there's a big difference between I can assemble a gearbox in 3 hours when I have instructions and somebody can check my work versus I can assemble a gearbox in 10 minutes between finals 1 and finals 2. And if I do it wrong, we lose. And even if there's tasks that like we're not going to need to do very often, it's still incredibly valuable that we spend time practicing them so that we're ready to do them when we need to do them. And that's one thing that like we can do with a lot of assembly work and a lot of electrical work. Like with electrical, we play a game where the students have a control system in front of them and they work in pairs, and one student closes their eyes while the other one changes something. about the board, like they take out a breaker or they switch some wires, and then the game is for the first student to identify what's wrong with it and fix it. It's the same thing, you know, going back to the gearbox example, like our kids do speed challenges for assembling planetary gearboxes, like put them together and take them apart. Not necessarily because that needs to be done right now, but it will probably need to be done at some point, and then we will be able to, like, we will have the skill that we need when we need it. So this is a long answer, but to summarize, the first goal with balancing not having freshman jobs is identifying what needs to be done a lot and what can be taught easily. And then the backup to that is emphasizing that training and practice is incredibly valuable, and that we don't do work to get it on the competition field. We do work to be ready to do what we need to do when we need it, without the foresight for what we're going to need to be able to do when. We probably put like 90 to 95% of our effort into robots and projects and processes that are never intended to hit the competition field. So most of our students like don't have an expectation that what they're doing will be on the field, because the experience is in being ready for the unknown future. Does that sufficiently answer your question? What was that?
Allison, there's a couple other questions in chat. Do you want to deal with these now, or do you want to deal with them at the end? There's one from Ryan back at 53 after the hour, and then there's another one from Ryan at 6 after.
I will get to his at the end, and okay. Then, you know, everyone else keep thinking. And then, yes, we have 25 team members, roughly. It's a little fuzzy because we also have our middle school team members that we think of them, and we want them to think of themselves as RoboJackets team members. So it gets a little fuzzy. All right. I'm going to go through these things quickly because I think this is things that most teams have some idea of, and if you don't, then this is like a inspiration to contemplate them. But one of the things that we take very seriously with onboarding new members is setting expectations and being honest and consistent with them. So when new members come into our team as part of the onboarding process, we do not tell them that this is easy, because to be quite honest, it's not easy. And it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. However, we tell them that while it is a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, we want students to be, you know, multifaceted, real humans with varied interests and opportunities to do a lot of things. So this isn't easy. It is a commitment, but our team members play sports and they're taking high-level classes, and they have jobs, and they have families, and they have church obligations, and they have friends. And we want them to get to have those experiences because that's what turns them into real people and not like resumes. So with regards to setting expectations for new team members, my recommendation is know what your expectations are. You know, for hours per week at different times of year. What are the expectations for academics? What are the expectations for attending events? And have those documented and like clearly visible and stick to them. But at least for us, we make an effort to, you know, consistently encourage students that we think they can do it. Like, it's not easy, but we think you can do this. And that just, you know, that kind of baseline prevents like problems from cropping up 2 or 3 years from now. If someone was brought in and like, oh, you know, this is super easy, you can attend 1 day a week and it's totally fine. For some teams, that's absolutely true, because they have a structure that allows them to integrate students that are present 1 day a week and still have a valuable experience. And that's why there's not a lot of detail on this slide, because expectations are super varied between teams. But whatever your expectations are, be honest about them and be consistent about them. This is like the boring and tedious element of onboarding, but whatever your team's routines and procedures are, onboarding is your opportunity to solidify those and make them a like unconscious, painless process for the next 4 to 6 years or however long the student is with you on the team. Again, routines and procedures are super varied, and this list could be way longer. And honestly, it should be. Perhaps I should add to it. But things like, how do your team members sign in and sign out? How do team members communicate absences? How does the shop get cleaned and organized? And those are things that, not going to lie, it takes a lot of effort early on, because most incoming team members aren't used to being in an environment where like those things matter. But having that solidified super early on, again, if the student's going to be with you for the next 4 to 6 years, then if that's strong in onboarding, you don't need to spend the next 4 years like being stressed about having incomplete sign in and sign out logs, because it's just done and it's easy. Same thing with cleaning and organization. That kind of goes back to not having freshman jobs, because cleaning and organization is frequently one of the freshman jobs. For us, we don't really clean the shop up at the end of day. We are very fortunate that we have a dedicated shop in the school that's our space, so that we don't have to clean up every day. So this will be, very different for teams that share space. But we don't clean up at the end of day, and instead at the beginning of every meeting for the first 5 or 10 minutes, everybody cleans together as much as they can in that period of time. And we've reached a balance where most of the time things are mostly put away, at least enough that everyone can find what they need. And we don't have kids that are, spending more than 15 or 20 minutes of their time at every meeting cleaning. And we've reached the balance of functional. But routines and procedures is something that throughout onboarding, like by the end of onboarding, whatever basic routines and procedures your team has is something that new members should do without thinking about it, and without needing to be reminded. All right. And then finally, on the norms and culture portion of onboarding, this is the last domain in training for us, because we probably put more of an emphasis on this than we do on the technical skills a lot of the time. And again, like all of my other outlines, it's got space to grow because we're always making this more in depth. The breadth of norms and cultures is extreme. Even for us, like all 7 years, we've emphasized something different, because it's just kind of an adventure of identifying, whatever our biggest weakness is at the time and learning all of that all together. But if you haven't had a discussion with your team on what you find important, now is a great time to do that, especially with COVID, because you're probably not super busy with manufacturing, which leaves time to focus on like, as a team, what is important to us? We go really super into detail on this sometimes. Like right now, our, big team norm and culture that we are inculcating in all of our team members really is the concept of types of fun. So type 1 fun is like traditional fun. That's things that are fun at the moment while you're doing them. And type 2 fun is things that aren't actually super fun while you're doing them, but they're satisfying and they're rewarding. So they're fun when they're done. And type 3 fun is never actually really that fun. It's either a good story or a personal growth experience someday. And we are using that with our team members to emphasize that we usually try to live around type 2 fun. And we do a lot of work that isn't necessarily actually fun while you're doing it, but it makes us stronger and our performance is great. And that part is super fun. So because there is such a breadth here, my approach is we pick one thing at a time and we figure out what we can do to address that. And that, because it's something that everyone is doing together, the whole team, and it's not singling out new members, that is how we develop that cohesion and that collective understanding. And then I guess finally, before I go back to questions and discussion, I've emphasized this a couple of times, but onboarding is a process that can be improved and changed. And I highly recommend that you don't think of it as something that you do the way you've always done it, especially, you know, with COVID and all of the restrictions being what they are right now. A lot of teams will never go back to the way they used to operate. We definitely won't. We've learned a lot of new tricks and tactics. And even without this, you know, pandemic experience the last couple of months, each year we want to look at, you know, how the team members from the previous year were involved and engaged throughout the season. What did we do? What went well? What could have been better? And then what elements of onboarding can we change? So most teams bring in new members as a cohort. You have a whole group of them and some number of them start and some smaller number of them like actually end up joining the team and staying with the team. We actually haven't ever done that. We typically bring in new members 1 or 2 at a time throughout the year. So new members are joining sometimes mid-build season, sometimes at competitions, sometimes in summer day camp, sometimes in the fall. And we have found for us that that's super helpful for the onboarding process because the majority of the team always knows what's going on, and it's much easier for new members to norm to everybody else because they are the minority. That also gives us tons of bandwidth to make sure everybody gets a lot of individual attention because we're not bringing in, you know, huge numbers of students at a time. And we've found that that has a lot of benefits. One thing that teams can vary a lot is the time of year. So bringing in new students in the spring versus in the summer versus in the fall all have different timelines relative to the competition season and different benefits and detriments. And then another, I think the last like big element and variation there is having dedicated new member meetings versus having general team meetings. And I know different teams make both of them work, but just like thinking of the onboarding process as something with elements that can be varied feeds into continuous improvement and always making this better. Q&A.
Did you get to Ryan's questions and then Liv?
Yeah. I'll look at Ryan's first. The easy one is the bolt sorting competition. He's seen.
Allison?
Yes.
Because this is being recorded, we can't see the question. So if you read a question from chat, if you could just read the question for the recording first.
Okay. So Ryan says, can you talk about your bolt sorting competition in the context of practicing skills to be ready for competition? This is another example that I didn't bring up. In the spirit of full disclosure, Ryan has seen this video. So one of the things that we do as one of those just like practice activities is we do a speed, like we do little speed sorting games because we want new students coming in to develop the visual discrimination skills to understand that different things are different and details matter. And this sounds kind of silly because a lot of, like, of course 832 bolts and 1032 bolts are different, or of course flanged bearings and radial bearings are different, but to an incoming new member that hasn't been staring at these tiny parts for hundreds or thousands of hours throughout the course of their life, they don't actually look very different. It's pretty much the equivalent to like me trying to go hang out with a botanist and them understanding all of these different plants and flowers, and I'm just like, I don't know, they're plants. So having the context that new members don't have the experience to see those details, we came up with an activity to help them like learn to see it. And we got a timer from like the cup stacking and Rubik's Cubes games. And the game is to drop the handful of 832 bolts and 1032 bolts out onto a cafeteria tray and sort them out as fast as possible. And it's competitive and it's fun and it's engaging, and it's not something we do for a long time, but it's just one of a multitude of different activities that emphasize practicing and being ready and being able to do what you need to do in the time. How does day camp play into onboarding students? Would your process be the same without it? Would you recommend for other teams to implement a day camp? Yes, 100%. Day camp is awesome, especially for teams that are run by teachers or have a teacher involved that have access to the school during the summer. For us, day camp is multifaceted. It's our onboarding and training. It's also a revenue stream and time spent getting to know each other. So I definitely recommend that. And anyone that's interested in that can ask me after for more information. We have probably 30 to 40% of students that do the majority of their onboarding in a day camp setting. So yes, onboarding would definitely be different without day camp. I think that it would probably make us more like, it would put more pressure on us during build season because the training that happens during day camp is like very casual and we're not under time pressure. I'm trying to.
That you
sorry,
only onboard like 2 students at a time. So are you just running day camps throughout the whole entire year just for those 2 students? And
so summer day camp in a non-COVID year, we run 7 weeks of full day, 40 hours a week day camp. We have 2nd grade through 12th grade involved, doing everything from like Lego League aged activities up through FTC and FRC. A number of students in day camp are not team members and not interested in being team members. They just think robots is cool, and they're interested in doing the activities over the summer. So day camp is a much larger like process and activity than just onboarding. But yeah, the day camp is also fulfilling needs in the community for childcare and exposing more kids to STEM, even without the intent that they become team members. It's more training time for our current team members because training never really ends for us. Like, we're just doing training from the time they join until the time they graduate. Does that sufficiently answer that question? And then from Lisa V, we have penalties or carrots. We have many who need to leave when it's time to clean up, for example. All right, so that's actually why we don't clean up at the end of day. Because from I, as an adult, really hate stopping what I'm doing to go clean something. So my general assumption is that the students have the same approach. So for us, we don't clean at the end of day because well, firstly, we don't have to. And then secondly, because everyone is leaving at different times of day. Like we have a huge age range on our team. So older kids are staying later, and we don't want the kids that are staying later to have to clean up after everybody. And for the kids that are leaving when they're leaving, for the most part, the reason they're not cleaning is because they're working and they're very focused on what they're doing. And I don't necessarily want to interrupt them. Our kids are pretty good about generally like putting their things away at least enough that they get like their important parts on a cafeteria tray. We have cafeteria trays, and trays are like the, hey, don't touch this. This is someone's work in progress. Don't put it away or move it or take the parts or something. So that's an easy visual for everybody. As far as, if you are in a team situation where you have to clean up in the evening, we have been in that situation a number of years ago. And the big thing at that point was to emphasize cleaning as you go, and the concept that your workstation shouldn't really ever get to the point where it's a disaster zone, where it takes you more than 5 minutes to get everything cleaned up and put away. I'm trying to think through like what I think like getting things put away has enough cultural momentum with us that it's not a consistent issue. Like, not going to lie, there's definitely times when I've been very agitated with all of them at the state of the shop. And at some point I came to recognize that that was me having unreasonable expectations, not them being unreasonably messy. Does that sufficiently answer that? And does anyone else have any other questions? I think we're close to time, right?
Yeah, we were actually supposed to wrap up at 10:25 and have a 10-minute break before heading over to the next session. So there's been a lot of people joining, looks like, for the next session, which starts in 7 minutes.
Awesome. Well, in that case, thank you for your time this morning, everyone. And I will put my contact information in chat. If anyone wants to reach out to me to get more information on anything that I've said, please feel free to do so. Again, this is my full-time job, and I like talking to people about robots and robot things and coaching and leadership things.